James Paterson is the Liberal Senator from Victoria, very strong on foreign relations, very strong on matters to do with China. He joins us now. Let's have a chat, my friend, about China. And yet another example here about how China is going after supposedly free people in countries that aren't in China. Talk about how this is happening, particularly to women, and how they are being, well, at the very least, trolled, but they're being trolled from back in Beijing.
Paul, thanks for having me on to discuss what I think is a very important story, and it's worth spending just a minute explaining what's happened here. So the Australian Strategic Policy Institute has identified a group of journalists, researchers and activists, all of whom are living in the West, all of whom are young women and all of whom are of Asian descent, who have done research and exposed the human rights abuses and other malign behaviour of the Chinese Communist Party. And as a result of the work they've done, have been subject to the most vicious, the most horrific online trolling that really constitutes harassment. And it is highly sexualised in nature. And what ASPI has identified is that it is almost certainly the case that this is the work of Chinese intelligence agencies and that it's happening in China. Now, this is an appalling thing, and it's a very serious thing for a liberal democracy like Australia to have to deal with. Because what this is attempting to do is to intimidate and to coerce into silence independent voices in our democracies who are critical of the Chinese government for its human rights abuses. We cannot allow this to happen. We must rally around these young women and we must support them. And there's very important responsibilities not just for the social media companies to deal with this because it already violates their platform rules, but also for the government to step up. The previous government led the world reforming our foreign interference and espionage laws, largely has guarded against foreign interference within our political parties and democratic institutions, but the unfinished, untapped area that must be dealt with is this cyber-enabled foreign interference, which does go to the heart of our democracy because it threatens our freedom of speech.
Yeah, guys, if we can go to the third quote that we have here from Ellen. I want to show this to people because it explains just how industrial all of this is. The social media bombardment in English and Mandarin comes mainly during office hours in Beijing. And the professional trolls even take a lunch break, pausing between noon and 2 p.m. So how do we fix this? Because for obvious reasons, the internet means you can communicate across countries. When you talk about the things that the former government was doing, what's your suggestion about what the current government should do here? Because we obviously want to defend free women trying to do the best to better the world.
Well, the first point is, Paul, that there are things that social media companies can do, and some of them do, but they're not doing it anywhere near well enough. They should be taking down this content because it is in violation of their rules. These accounts are created in a spammy way. You know, hundreds and hundreds of accounts get registered with one digit different in the identification, and they repeat this self-generated spam, so it clearly violates their rules. It should be removed from the platform. It's harmful. It's not helpful for the user experience. And secondly, if the platforms are unwilling or unable to do that themselves, then government needs to look at whether they should be obliged to do so. And government should consider doing what some social media companies already do, which is proactively going out and labelling state-affiliated Twitter entities which are involved in some of this. So, for example, on Twitter, they say that this is a Chinese government-affiliated entity, and so everyone knows who it's coming from, and the Chinese government knows they'll be judged by the things that are posted on that account, even if they've been trying to deny their connection to it. But other social media platforms, like TikTok, for example, don't do this at all. So they're quite plausibly could be, I think almost certainly is, reams of Chinese government-generated information on TikTok, which is not labelled as such and no one knows as such, and it would have a powerful disincentive for them, as well as informing us as users about where this is coming from.
In the same way that you would knock a cigarette out of the hand of your kid, knock TikTok off their phone. It is bad. It truly is bad, all right? We have to have that same attitude because it is pernicious and it is quite scary, the data going back to China. Now, today the AEC puts out the number that, well, we all knew was coming, which is that an awful lot of rich people back the Teals. The Teals, of course, the whole game was to eventually finish above Labor. That then would mean preferences. They'd finish above the Greens. Greens fold in with Labor, and surprise, surprise, they end up winning seats. Now, I don't want to fall for the easy conversation about where the money comes from and all the rest of it. I want to talk about what's going to happen next. As you know, Special Minister of State is looking at a system about capping the amount we can spend on elections, but potentially capping donations as well. Now, if that system is one that levels the playing field, it'll be interesting to see. But you know as well as I do that The unions are considered independent entities. I think that this is going to be used as yet another reason that the government's going to find a way to give unions 10-to-1 spending power over Teals, Liberals, Greens, One Nation and anyone but the Labor Party. What do you think?
Paul, you're absolutely right to be cynical. We know that whenever Labor does campaign finance reform or electoral reform, it is with one objective in mind, and that is damaging their political opponents and strengthening their position. We've seen this in Victoria, where they put in very low donation caps, very low disclosure caps, and a whole lot of other regulations about what you can do, but they've largely exempted the union movement from that, and therefore have put in place an institutional advantage that can basically never be overcome, whether you're a Liberal or a Teal or a Green or anyone else, if you want to compete with the Labor Party in elections in Victoria. And I think that's going to have a substantial impact on the result in Victoria.
100%. Thank you, mate. Do appreciate it, James. Thank you for stepping up on the big issues that matter and always representing freedom in the Senate.